How do we really know? I mean, when we look at these huge companies that shape so much of our world, how do we know they're actually operating ethically, effectively, transparently? What's the system kind of behind the scenes that keeps them accountable, especially with the financial information they give us?
Well, it really comes down to something called corporate governance. You could almost think of it as the operating system for a company.
Yeah.
It's the whole structure, the processes, the relationships that dictate how an organization is directed, how it's controlled.
Okay, the operating system.
Yeah. And at its heart, it defines that really complex relationship between the board of directors, the shareholders, and other stakeholders too. It's fundamentally about how the decision makers act, how they're monitored, and critically, how they're held accountable for their actions, for the company's performance.
And I guess one of the most visible things that comes out of that system, for most of us anyway, are those published financial statements, the audited ones. Yeah. Having financial statements you can actually trust, backed up by an auditor saying, yes, this looks right, that feels incredibly important. It's not just a nice to have, is it?
Oh, absolutely vital. For shareholders, for stakeholders, often that's their main window into what's really going on financially.
It's the trust mechanism, basically.
Precisely.
So for this deep dive, what we want to do is unpack these core ideas of corporate governance. We'll look at how different places, different countries approach it. And crucially, we want to show you how these principles directly impact the audit itself, especially through roles like the Audit Committee. The aim here is for you to get a really solid grasp of these safeguards pretty quickly. So let's get into it.
Okay. So if you look globally, lots of places, the UK included, use something called a comply or explain approach.
Comply or explain.
Yeah. It's not like a strict set of laws you must follow to the letter. Instead, companies get a set of principles. They're expected to follow them. But if they decide not to comply with a specific one, they don't get fined immediately or anything. What they must do is explain why. Publicly. They have to disclose why they deviated and what they're doing instead. So it's built on transparency, accountability through disclosure, even if you don't comply fully.
Okay, that makes sense. It sounds more flexible, less like a one-size-fits-all rule book. How does that stack up against other places?
Well, then you have jurisdictions like the U.S., for instance. They often lean towards a more prescriptive approach. Their corporate governance rules are often baked right into legislation. Yep. They're legally binding laws.
So much stricter.
In a way, yes, you've got this contrast. Comply or explain offers flexibility but demands transparency, while the prescriptive way mandates specific actions by law. What's interesting, though, is despite these different philosophies, they tend to agree on the substance of what good governance looks like.
Oh, so the end goal is similar.
Largely, yes. Both systems emphasize things like having a balanced board, needing independent non-executive directors. They both want robust ways to appoint directors, manage their pay, and they both see the value in audit committees. And, crucially, both demand disclosure about all this in the annual report.
So, whether it's principles or actual laws, the core ingredients seem pretty universal. Okay, let's maybe zoom in on one of these frameworks. The UK Corporate Governance Code seems like a good example.
It's a great example. Very influential. It's built around 5 main sections, each with key principles. First up is leadership.
Leadership, okay.
This is really about stopping one person having all the power, the corporate dictator risk. If one individual dominates, maybe decisions are fast, but the potential for a massive mistake goes way up. That's why the code pushes for a clear division of responsibilities. Usually that means separating the CEO role from the chair role.
Ah, so you build in challenge right at the top.
Exactly. It forces more deliberation on the big calls.
Got it. A fundamental check and balance. What's the next pillar?
Then you've got effectiveness. This is all about making sure the board and its committees have the right mix, the right skills, experience, different perspectives, and crucially, independence. It's not just about having a board. They need the actual collective capability to guide the company well.
So getting the right people in the room.
And keeping them effective. So formal, transparent appointment processes, ongoing training, regular re-election, making sure they stay sharp and relevant.
Okay, right talent, keep them sharp. And after effectiveness, accountability must come into it.
You got it, accountability. The board's job here is to present a fair, balanced, and understandable picture of the company's situation and its prospects. It's not just about the numbers being right, it's about the narrative being clear and honest. This also means maintaining solid risk management and internal control systems.
The internal safety nets.
Precisely. Protecting assets, ensuring data integrity. And it covers establishing formal setups for corporate reporting and managing that relationship with the external auditor.
That links straight back to those reliable financial statements we started with. Okay. And what about paying the people in charge? The incentives.
That leads us to remuneration. The core idea is simple. Pay should be enough to attract and keep good leaders, but, and this is a big but, it shouldn't be excessive. We all see those headlines, right? Executive pay going through the roof while the company struggles. This principle tries to stop that disconnect. It stresses linking a big chunk of executive pay to long-term performance, both for the company and the individual. Aligning their interests with sustained success, not just quick wins, helps build trust too.
Yeah, you'd hope so. Okay, and the last one, companies don't exist in a bubble. What about the owners, the shareholders?
That's covered by relations with shareholders. The principle is there needs to be a real, ongoing dialogue between the company and its investors. Both ways. The board as a whole needs to make sure this happens. Think about the annual general meeting, the AGM. It shouldn't just be a formality.
It's a real chance to engage.
Exactly. A chance to communicate, explain strategy, and encourage shareholders to actually participate.
Okay, so those 5 pillars, leadership, effectiveness, accountability, remuneration, and shareholder relations sort of form the bedrock. But when we talk about accountability and the audit, one committee seems to really stand out. The Audit Committee.
Absolutely. It's so central to good governance, especially financial governance, that it gets its own detailed guidance. And its makeup is really key. It should have at least 3 independent, non-executive directors. And crucially, at least one of them needs recent, relevant financial experience.
So independence plus financial know-how.
Yes. That combination gives them the expertise and the necessary distance from the day-to-day running of the company to provide genuinely objective oversight.
Right. And what are their main jobs? What are they actually responsible for overseeing?
Well, there were quite a few hats. First, they monitor the integrity of the financial statements themselves and any big announcements about performance. They really pore over the published financial info, and they need to be ready to challenge the finance director, challenge the external auditors if something seems off.
So they're the first line of scrutiny on the numbers.
They are. And it begs the question, doesn't it? How deep do they go?
Yeah, exactly. Are they just looking at the final reports, or are they digging into the systems that produce those numbers?
Oh, they absolutely look at the underlying systems. They review the company's internal financial controls, the risk management systems, unless there happens to be a separate board committee for risk. And if the company has an internal audit team, the audit committee oversees them too, checking how effective they are.
And if there's no internal audit,
then they have to consider annually whether one is needed. And if they decide it isn't, they have to explain why in the annual report. Justify that decision.
Okay, so they're really plugged into the company's internal checks and balances. It sounds like they must sometimes have pretty tough conversations, especially with the finance director.
It definitely requires a strong, independent perspective. And speaking of challenging situations, they also play a key role in preventing and detecting fraud. A big part of that is making sure there are confidential ways for staff to blow the whistle, to raise concerns about potential financial wrongdoing without fear of comeback.
Ah, the whistleblowing channels. That's another critical layer of protection. Okay, so that covers a lot of internal ground. But they also have a massive role regarding the external auditors, right? This seems like where independence gets really tested.
Yes, this is absolutely crucial. This is where their oversight directly impacts the quality of that external audit you rely on. Think of them as the gatekeepers for audit quality. They recommend who should be appointed as the external auditor, reappointed, or even removed. They approve the fees for the audit itself and for any other work the auditors might do. They agree the terms of engagement.
Approving fees. That seems tricky. Isn't there an inherent tension there? Paying someone, you also need to be fiercely independent.
There absolutely is. It's a delicate balance, which is exactly why their vigilance is so important. For instance, in the UK now, the big listed companies, the FTSE 350, they have to put their audit out to tenders. Basically, make firms bid for the job every 10 years. That's designed to keep things competitive and bring in fresh eyes.
Okay, so tendering helps. But day to day, how do they manage that fee versus independence issue?
They have to constantly assess it. Annually, they formally assess the external auditor's independence, their objectivity, and just the overall effectiveness of the audit process. They look at the ethical rules auditors have to follow. They then report their findings to the main board with a clear recommendation, reappoint the auditor, or not. And their section in the annual report has to talk about this assessment. It needs to mention how long the current audit firm has been in place, when the last tender happened, and any contracts that might restrict their choice of auditor.
Wow, okay. That's a lot of specific oversight just focused on protecting independence. How do they actually do that assessment? What are they looking for?
They seek confirmation, basically. They need reassurance from the auditors that their firm and the people working on the audit don't have any financial ties, business links, employment history, or even close personal relationships with the company that could compromise their independence. Every year, they ask the audit firm for detailed info on their internal policies for maintaining independence. That includes rules about rotating the main audit partners and key staff off the engagement after a certain period.
Right, to prevent relationships getting too cozy over time.
Exactly, stops things becoming too entrenched.
So it's clear they have this big picture oversight role. But how involved do they get in the actual audit process year by year? Are they just waiting at the end for the report?
Oh no, not at all. They're involved throughout the annual audit cycle. Right from the start, they review the audit plan. They look at things like the proposed materiality level. That's basically the threshold where an error in the accounts becomes significant enough to potentially mislead someone reading them.
So making sure the audit focuses on what really matters.
Yes, exactly. Focusing effort on the big risks, not getting lost in tiny details. They also look at the resources the audit firm plans to use, the seniority of the team, their expertise. The audit firm leadership should meet with the committee to discuss the whole audit strategy before the main field work even starts.
So they're checking the auditor's game plan before they even start playing.
Pretty much. Then, during the audit, they meet with the external auditors again to review the findings as they emerge. They discuss any major issues that came up, whether they've been sorted out. They scrutinize key accounting judgments, look at the level of errors found, even small ones that aren't corrected, and they want explanations from both management and the auditors. They also check how responsive management is being to what the auditors are finding and recommending. It ensures key issues are aired as they happen.
Not just a big surprise at the end.
Right. And then once the audit is done, the statements are drafted, they do a final assessment of the whole process. Did the auditors stick to the plan? If not, why? Were they robust enough in challenging management? Did they handle tricky judgments well? Did they respond properly to the committee's questions? They often get feedback from the finance director, maybe the head of internal audit too. And they review the auditor's final management letter, which points out weaknesses or areas for improvement. Does this show the auditors really understand the business? Have the recommendations been acted on? All this constant attention really builds the quality and rigor of that final external audit. It fosters trust.
It really sounds like it. Okay, one last area that always seems to cause debate, non-audit services. When the external auditor does other work for the company besides the main audit, how does the committee handle that? It seems like a minefield for independence.
It's a critical point, you're right. The Audit Committee has to create and enforce a really clear policy about engaging the external auditor for any non-audit work. The absolute priority is making sure these extra services don't compromise the auditor's independence or objectivity for the main audit.
So how do they decide what's okay and what's not?
They have to consider several things. Is the audit firm genuinely the best placed provider for this specific service? Are there strong safeguards to keep the non-audit work separate from the audit team and judgment? What's the nature of the service itself? Is it something routine or more like management consulting? They also look at the fees for the non-audit work compared to the audit fee. Is it becoming disproportionately large? And critically, how are the individuals on the audit team paid if they also bring in or work on these non-audit jobs?
So they're literally setting the boundaries, drawing the line on what the auditor can and can't do.
Exactly. Their formal policy usually outlines different categories. Some routine, low-risk services might be pre-approved up to a certain fee level. Others will require specific advance approval from the Audit Committee before the company can even sign the contract. And then there will be services that are completely off-limits for the external auditor because the conflict of interest is just too high.
Can you give an example of something often off-limits?
Well, a common one that requires very careful thought is if the external audit firm also provides internal audit services to the company. The committee has to think really hard about how that might affect the company's own internal controls and, crucially, how it looks to investors. Does it appear independent, even if there are safeguards? Perception matters here too.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So just to sort of wrap up where we've been today, we started with the big idea of corporate governance, how it's approached differently maybe in the UK versus the US, but with common goals. Then we really dove into the specifics, particularly the board's role, and especially that critical function of the audit committee. We've seen how all these mechanisms are designed to push for accountability, for transparency, and ultimately for financial reports we can rely on.
And I think when you connect all those dots, it becomes really clear, doesn't it? The audit committee's constant watchfulness, overseeing the financials, the internal controls, managing that whole relationship with the external auditor, their independence, their effectiveness, right through the audit cycle. That vigilance is what directly supports the quality, the rigor of the external audit. It's that oversight, that constant questioning and checking that's absolutely fundamental for building and keeping trust in the numbers companies publish.
Absolutely. Which leaves us, and you, with a final thought to maybe ponder. Given how deeply these governance principles really shape a company, its strategy, its performance, its reputation, think about how the specific details of its governing structure might matter. Things like how truly independent is its audit committee? How strict are its policies on non-audit services? How might those specific choices, those details, influence how resilient that company is, how trusted it is, especially when times get tough? It goes way beyond just the numbers on the balance sheet.